last like rock band out of our mold.
There's never been another band like them.
It was one of those like big moments, you know. I remember where I was the first time I heard Appetite.
They were singing about things that most teenagers could relate to.
These were guys who were born and bred to do one thing, to live the rock and roll lifestyle.
And they went from the streets, literally, to being one of the biggest bands in the world.
90 million albums sold worldwide, 39 million in the United States alone. Their 1987 major label release, Appetite for Destruction, sold over 26 million copies, making it one of the best-selling debut albums in history. The band's classic lineup consisted of frontman Axl Rose, lead guitarist Slash, rhythm guitarist Izzy Stradlin, bassist Duff McKagan, and drummer Steven Adler. But before they could make it big in the mid-'80s, fate had to bring them together. Slash grew up Saul Hudson in Los Angeles, California, with parents who worked in the music industry.
When I first met him, I noticed he had a talent for drawing. It's not like something he did, he just knew how to do it. Then we started riding bikes together, and he was doing things that they do now that are common, but back in the 70s, all these tricks weren't that common, so he was ahead of his time.
Originally from Cleveland, Ohio, drummer Steven Adler became friends with Slash while growing up in West Hollywood.
Slash and I got together when we were about 11, 12 years old, junior high school. I had a little guitar. When I met him in school, he came over, and I showed him the guitar, and literally, the next day, he had the guitar.
Duff's a great bass player, looks like a rock star, loved to drink back in the old days.
Michael Duff McKagan was a 6'4" blonde from Seattle who was an honor student in high school. But he dropped out to go on tour with the punk band, the Fastbacks.
Played drums in a few bands, played guitar in a few bands, played bass in a couple bands.
In 1983, Duff McKagan headed south to join the music scene of Los Angeles.
Bill Bailey is Axl Rose's real name. He grew up in Lafayette, Indiana, and one of his best friends was Jeff Isbell. Jeff Isbell is Izzy Stradlin. Izzy moved first. He was the only one with a high school diploma, and he left Lafayette, Indiana immediately. Axl stayed behind for a while, changed his name from Bill Bailey to W. Axl Rose when he was 17 years old because he found out that his real father's name was William Rose. But he kept getting arrested. He got in trouble all the time. I think he was arrested something like 20 times before he was 19 years old. Somewhere around 1982, Axl Rose, as he was now called, jumped bail in Lafayette, Indiana, and drove to Los Angeles, where he spent about anywhere from 3 to 6 months trying to find Izzy Stradlin.
Sunset Strip, Los Angeles, mid-'80s. Every single girl had huge teased hair. Every single guy thought he was Bret Michaels, thought he was Tommy Lee. It was like rock and roll high school. All of Hollywood was consumed by these guys and their androgyny and their licks and their super over-the-top, cheetah print heavy metal.
So there was this incredible vacuum in 1985 and 1986 of a lot of crap coming out and being shoved down the throats of the high school kids of America who had nothing else to buy. So there was obviously room for a blazing, furious, half-psychotic rock and roll band to come out of. It didn't matter where it came out of. It just happened to come out of this the glam metal scene on Sunset Strip.
All the bands were coming to Hollywood. It was like the promised land because so many bands were getting signed out of this area. People were like trying each other on like wet suits in those band days. It's like a guy would be in a band for like 2 weeks and then he'd be moving on to the next band.
The The future members of Guns N' Roses circled each other on the Sunset Strip music scene in Hollywood before finally coming together in June of 1985. Slash and Steven Adler were in a band named Road Crew. They needed a singer, so they convinced Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin, who were in a band called Rose, to start a new band that they would call Hollywood Rose. Hollywood Rose fell apart. Axl joined with Tracy Guns to form LA Guns. Izzy joined a band called London, and Slash auditioned for a band called Poison, but their persona didn't quite fit Slash's style. In the meantime, LA Guns changed their name to Guns N' Roses. They needed a bassist, so they hired Duff, whom they knew from their earlier band, Road Crew.
So Guns N' Roses is playing around at the Troubadour, and they got everybody except Slash and Steven from the Appetite for Destruction lineup. Then Duff, who was from Seattle, pretty much booked a tour to Seattle in some of the clubs that he was familiar with.
Tracy Guns and Rob Gardner, the original GNR lead guitarist and drummer, were somewhat skeptical of the trip.
They didn't want to do the tour. The tour was booked, and we called Slash and Steven.
With the new guitarist and drummer on board, ready to travel, the classic Guns N' Roses lineup was set.
They came in and like the first couple chords that the five of us in the same room, it was like lightning and really struck.
We were driving up to Seattle, and Danny, the guy who worked with Roddy and was driver, car broke down.
We ended up hitchhiking, and five guys wearing leather jackets, carrying guitars, hitchhiking. You're not going to get a lot of rides, and if you do, not for very far. And we hitchhiked for 1,000 miles.
When they got to Seattle, they did the gigs, but no one showed up.
They went through hell to get there, and after they got done playing, the owner didn't want to pay them. And they basically threw them up against the wall and demanded some money. They got a little bit of money.
The other club owners on the tour heard that the show sucked and the band wasn't happening, so it got canceled. So the first Guns N' Roses tour was an absolute fiasco.
But when they got back to Los Angeles, they were tight. They had a bond of taking this little road trip and surviving it, making it happen, hitchhiking or whatever, whatever it took.
It was the best band we'd all been in, and we knew for us, this was it musically.
Guns N' Roses emerged from the Hollywood gutters in 1985 and injected a gritty, emotional, and sometimes dangerous edge to hard rock. The band's musical style, on-stage presence, and bad boy image would be embraced by fans who had grown tired of the glam metal scene. As individuals, they were five talented musicians from around the country.
Slash, to me, is one of the greatest guitar players I've ever heard in my life.
He just plays from the heart. He comes from the blues rock style. He's got great chops.
It never looks like he's struggling. It never looks like he's trying too hard. It never looks like he's ever kind of lost. It's an effortlessness that I certainly wish that I had.
You really didn't know what he looked like. I mean, his hair covered his face, and he always had the signature top hat, but it fit the band so well. He was so perfect for that time and that place.
Well, Izzy was always, the secret weapon, because Izzy wrote more songs than you thought and wrote more great riffs than you thought.
He was like a refreshing guy to see in a band because he was a classical rhythm guitar player, playing chords and helped structuring and fill out songs and things like that.
Izzy was a quiet guy. He really never indulged in the fame and stardom of Guns N' Roses. He really was, I think he was more of a songwriting type of person. I think he kept mostly to himself.
Duff McKagan, he was the punk soul of the band. He was also a peacemaker because he grew up the youngest of, I think it was 8 kids. He learned how to compromise.
He's one of the best pick-style rock and roll bass players there is out there, period.
And he was always like the coolest guy. Always had girls. I mean, I looked up to him, not just because he's 7 feet tall.
Steven was a perfect drummer for Appetite. He had a small kit, and he just cut it.
It was a kick and snare and the hi-hat and one cymbal and the floor tom, and it was just all about the groove and all about the bounce and all about just locking in with Duff.
He just seemed like the nice guy that he got mixed up with the wrong crowd, The cartoonish character that has been created around Axl Rose because of his antics overshadows the fact he's a great lead singer, a phenomenal vocalist, and one of the greatest on-stage performers that you will ever see in rock and roll.
The kind of traits that make a really great frontman don't make, oftentimes, a happy person or a person easy to deal with.
I think he's like one of those guys, it's one in a million, that they just don't come along every day.
I mean, I don't know anybody who gives that much every show like Axl did. You know, and he was nervous every time and insecure, and it all came out on stage.
What I love about Axl is that there's always that element of what makes rock and roll exciting, which is so lacking these days, which is that you never know what's going to happen next.
If unpredictability equals excitement, then Guns N' Roses had more excitement than they could handle in their early days. None of them had a regular place to sleep or enough money for food. One of the advantages they found of being in a rock band on Sunset Boulevard in the 80s was that they met a lot of strippers.
Took care of us, supported us. I don't think we could have actually made it. Because, I mean, we were living in a studio, no bathroom. It was like a 12 by 12 room behind Guitar Center.
It was pretty raunchy. They had no money, you know, so it's usually like you'd go in there. I would come in there, because I worked construction back then, and I would come in there at like 3:30 in the afternoon, and I'd open up the door, it'd be pitch dark. There'd just be bodies all over the floor. You didn't know band members, chicks, whatever.
These were not fake it till you make it type of guys. These were just like the runaways you see in Hollywood Boulevard. These were legit dudes, and they didn't really know anything else except for sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Guns N' Roses needed a record contract. Through word of mouth, their club performances started to generate a lot of buzz.
Well, people knew, even before there was a record deal, they were like packing the clubs.
They started to get a reputation around Los Angeles, but it was a very negative reputation.
GNR had attracted a following, delivering the type of down and dirty rock that was everything their polished hairband counterparts were incapable of.
We were angry, determined, and needed to have it done our way.
By 1986, the hard rock band Guns N' Roses had made a name for themselves around the LA music scene. But the members were still struggling musicians, willing to do just about anything and stay anywhere in order to get by, including their original manager Vicki Hamilton's apartment.
Well, a couple of nights ended up being like 6 months of them like in and out of my apartment, and first it was just Axl on the couch, and then later it ended up being Slash and Izzy and Steven also, because the police kept on circling the rehearsal space, and I think there was like then 6 of us living in a 1-bedroom apartment.
We destroyed that apartment. I mean, the last day we stayed there, me and Axl got in a fight, and he pushed me into this fire extinguisher, and that glass broke everywhere. And I grabbed him and pushed him down on the coffee table, which is all glass, and it exploded.
Yeah, there was kind of a love-hate tension between them always, you know. I think that really happens in the best of bands.
After Guns really got established as a 5-piece band and started to rule the Strip, there was a feeding frenzy.
It was really when they played the Troubadour, and there was, I think, maybe 20 A&R people there, and it was really kind of funny because most of the A&R people were out on the sidewalk because it was so loud.
At the show was an executive by the name of Tom Zutaut from Geffen Records.
It was a good label for Guns to be on because they had very talented people, and they were willing to spend a lot of money and a lot of time to develop a band.
Tom Zutaut said to me, if that guy can really sing, I'll sign them. And I was like, oh, well, he can really sing, don't worry. And I like handed him the demo, and he called the next day and said, get him in my office.
We were angry, determined, and needed to have it done our way. And David Geffen came in to do whatever the hell you wanted.
As founder of Geffen Records, David Geffen had built his company on a small roster of promising talent.
The day that we signed the deal with Geffen Records, we were an hour and a half late to sign the contract because Axl could not find his contact lenses, and he got really mad and, ran out of the house. We found them in a pair of pants that he had had on like 3 days prior or whatever. Then we couldn't find Axl, so Slash was like, "Vicky, come here, you won't believe it." And I'm like, I walk outside the apartment door, and I look up on top of the whiskey, and there's Axl sitting sort of like in a yoga sort of meditative position. I'm like, "Come on, Axl, we got to go down and sign the contract." So
I think Axl's legitimately crazy. I mean, I don't think it's an act, but you can't deny his appeal.
I guess being a psycho basket case helps my career.
After the signing, Geffen Records rented the band a house so they could have a place to live and to continue writing new material. The band trashed the house, causing some $22,000 worth of damage.
Nobody wanted to deal with this band because they were so, they looked like outlaws, they acted like outlaws. They were actually very sweet, but they looked the part, so everybody stayed away from it.
In the spring of 1987, Guns N' Roses finally headed to the recording studio.
In the studio, the vibe was amazing. I can't say it enough times that we were such a close-knit group of guys. All the other stuff aside, the booze and the strippers and all that stuff. Whenever it was time for like our band, for music, for the band to be a band, all that stuff just went by the wayside.
The album, Appetite for Destruction, was finally released July 21st, 1987. But 5 months later, it had only sold 200,000 copies. Their first single, Welcome to the Jungle, received minimal radio play, and MTV would not air the music video because they claimed it was too violent.
Appetite for Destruction came out, no one picked up on it. That album, it wasn't like it came out and went right to #1. That album worked, and it worked.
GNR's live shows, on the other hand, were anything but disappointing.
They're one of the best bands I've ever photographed live, because it's just the energy on stage and the chemistry. It just works. And it's not choreographed, you know what I mean? But it looks choreographed sometimes, because they work so well together.
they started out opening for Aerosmith, and it got to the point where, you know, the promoters were demanding that Guns N' Roses be the headliner on the tour.
You see that slow building, you know, of the, like the first show. You know, there's a few people that know who they are. The next show, there's more people out there, and by the end of the tour, there's a lot of people that are coming to see. And it's kind of like one of those things you go, don't forget this, guys, because it's only going to happen once.
With a repertoire of songs and a celebrated live show, Guns N' Roses had come into their own. But unless they could figure out a way to sell more records, the band would not be on top for long. After 2 years together, Guns N' Roses finally released their debut album on July 21st, 1987. But the first single, Welcome to the Jungle, wasn't getting the results their record label had hoped it would. To make matters worse, MTV wouldn't play any of GNR's music videos. Fortunately for the band, young record mogul David Geffen intervened.
David Geffen started calling the head of Time Warner and the head of MTV personally, saying, you've got to put this on the air.
Basically, David Geffen begged them to play him, and they said, okay, we'll do it. We'll play them one time. We'll play Jungle on a Sunday night in the least desirable spot at 6 in the morning, New York time. So they played it once, and their switchboards blew up. People went nuts. They said, well, what is that? Play that again. And within, I think, a day or two, they were in the top 10 rotation.
With Welcome to the Jungle getting a positive response, the softer, more melodic Sweet Child of Mine music video was filmed and added to MTV's on-air rotation.
Sweet Child of Mine is where the band started to really pick up a national sort of girl following, because it wasn't like Angry, it was like the soft side of Angry.
I think it was delivering that song to a broader audience that really started the explosion.
And it became, not just the United States or North America or you know, the UK and Japan and North America, it became a worldwide thing where everybody knew what this record was.
There was nothing on the market that sounded like that record in that time period. You know, it was all happy party music, and Guns was like, you know.
The songs beginning to end on Appetite for Destruction are undeniable. If you are going to take a song about urban angst, Welcome to the Jungle is as good a song as there is about. You're going to take a love song, put Sweet Child of Mine up against anything Lionel Richie's ever wrote. It's just as good as a love song.
Over a year after its release, Appetite for Destruction finally hit #1, where it stayed for 5 weeks. The band's popularity skyrocketed, not only in the US, but around the world. On August 20th, 1988, GNR played the notorious Monsters of Rock festival at Castle Donington in the UK, where they shared the bill with groups Kiss and David Lee Roth.
They start to play, and 100,000 kids who are on this hill rush the stage.
Make it safe for everybody. So please, back up. Everybody else, take the step back or help get the person behind you to back up.
And unbeknownst to the band, 2 or 3 kids went down right in the sort of mosh pit and were basically trampled to death. Axl had stopped the show twice because he looked down and he didn't like what was happening in front of him. And they tried to stop the show, but the kids just kept going crazy. Later on that night, the band were drinking in the pub at their hotel, and the manager, looked glum, and they said, Slash was, what's the problem? We just had this great show. And they said, well, 2 kids died during your show. And I think Slash said something like, well, we went from the highest of the high to as low as you can possibly get as working in a band.
The media largely blamed the band for the tragedy, though they were completely exonerated in the official report. As a result, the English press bestowed upon them the title, the world's most dangerous band. In reality, the most danger they imposed was to themselves. Drug and alcohol use had reached a new high for most of the band members.
Well, Guns N' Roses was definitely party animals. I mean, even before they had the success, I was already driving Izzy to rehab, so there was, the addictive personalities within the band.
They woke up with the shakes, So in order to get rid of the shakes, they started drinking, So a case of beer during the day and a bottle of Jack Daniels was nothing to them. And then they went out after that.
I think that Guns N' Roses thought that the success would bring them happiness, but, as we all know, money doesn't bring happiness. So it's like they were still trying to fill the hole with other things, which became more partying, more girls, more drugs.
Though Axl had his own issues, he was never noted for his over-the-top drug abuse. And he became fed up as heroin use escalated among his bandmates. While opening for the Rolling Stones, he called out the band on stage and threatened that if the drug use didn't stop, it would be the last Guns N' Roses show. The group responded and promised to clean up their act, scrambling to take advantage of the success of Appetite. Geffen Records decided to keep the band busy by recording an extended play album with 4 new songs. They called it GNR Lies. Geffen Records released GNR Lies on November 29, 1988, and Guns N' Roses' huge popularity helped propel it to #2 on the charts. One song off of GNR Lies was a track called One in a Million. The lyrics set off a hailstorm from the press as they contained what many thought were derogatory racial remarks and rants against homosexuals.
One in a Million, which was on the second side of GNR Lies, is this song about racism and homophobia. And Axl's guitar player is half black. Slash is half black, half Jewish. His father was an immigrant.
It was not meant towards Slash or to black people or whatever. It was never intended that way. It was interpreted that way.
So then he got drawn into this whole explanation, which was really unfortunate because I think that's where he got labeled as somebody that he isn't.
I got a reputation for lying and just making up. And if I say the definition to a song, what it means to me, well, that can't be really what it means. It means what we think it means.
The controversy died down after the band performed at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert for AIDS awareness in April of 1992. Axl sang a duet with one of his musical idols, Elton John, on the Queen song Bohemian Rhapsody.
You know, and to do that with Elton John was, of course, you know, a nice closure. You know, because Elton was behind it, and he's obviously gay.
The band headed back to the studio to record their full-length follow-up to Appetite for Destruction. But with all of their newfound commercial success and rock star status, would they be able to come up with the kind of gritty material that filled their platinum-selling debut album?
Axl, who's a perfectionist, was not going to go in the studio and just sing for the hell of it.
After the monstrous success of Appetite for Destruction, it was time to record the band's second full-length studio album. But now, with so much exposure and fame, new pressures were put on the band by themselves and the outside for a follow-up recording that would exceed expectations.
They want another Welcome to the Jungle, but they don't want one that sounds just like Welcome to the Jungle.
Whenever you do the first record, you have your whole career to write your first record. You know, there's no benchmark. There's nothing that's been said before.
The band entered the studio in 1990 to begin what would become the Use Your Illusions recordings.
So I think with the first album, things were more primal, and with the Illusion, they were more complex.
Appetite, nobody knew who we were. And we would collect McDonald's rub-off coupons to eat. Illusions, we all had our own houses. We had drug dealers on call, security guys. There's a world of difference.
Now, they have toured the entire world. They are international superstars. Naturally, they're going to have to explore different routes and different avenues musically.
Musically, Axl wanted to bury Appetite. It's not that he hated Appetite, he just wanted to show the world that he's got something else which is way above it. You know, it's to the next level.
Now there was money at stake. You know, they made such an impact with Appetite, it had to be right. So Axl, who's a perfectionist, was not going to go in the studio and just sing for the hell of it. So if he said, I'm not singing for the next 4 weeks, you had to wait for the next 4 weeks.
It seemed very tense to me during that period because that's when the problems were going on with Steven.
In 1990, they were trying to make their album, and Steven Adler was a heroin addict, and he couldn't track the record. He couldn't lay down his drum tracks.
You know, it was shocking to me when they fired Steven for a heroin problem because, you know, during the days that they were living with me, Steven was possibly the straightest one of the band. I think his ego was crushed. I mean, you know, I think he, at that point, did a major downward spiral and, you know, tried to bury the pain in alcohol and drugs.
I was so proud, you know, to be a part of them, you know, the group, and a part of their lives. So that's what really hurt us because they disappeared, and all of a sudden I was alone.
Unfortunately, in 1996, Steven Adler suffered a minor stroke after a drug overdose, leaving his speech impaired. Adler would be the first to go from the original, classic GNR lineup. After his ousting July 11, 1990, the group called up Matt Sorum, who had been playing with a band called The Cult.
And I got a call. Flash said, hey man, it's Slash. We saw you play the other night. We love your drumming, me and Duff, and we'd like you to come jam with us. I said, well, what's happening with Steven Adler? And they said, well, we decided to let him go. We want to get a new drummer, you know.
The follow-up to Appetite for Destruction hit the street on September 17, 1991. But unlike most new discs, Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2 were two separate albums released simultaneously.
They very quickly sold more than 5 million records each. That was huge.
Guns N' Roses went out on the road with their new drummer Matt Sorum even before Use Your Illusion came out. They stayed on the road for 3 years. I think they went around the world twice.
Unfortunately, the extremely successful tour began to be overshadowed by onstage rants by Axl and late starts.
Even when they were playing in the clubs, he would show up late, you know. I don't know if it was more of a thing of perfection or just he knew that they would wait.
To
legendary how Axl sometimes wouldn't want to play, sometimes would stop playing 2 or 3 songs in. That's not all that interesting when you're playing in front of 300 people, but that's pretty insane when you think about they're filling stadiums full of 40,000 people and the guys having temper tantrums.
I was used to going on stage, I'm getting ready, my adrenal glands are opening up, I'm feeling it, you know, the crowd's there. That's how I went down, and we didn't even know what time it was going to be.
One tantrum at a show on July 2nd, 1991, near St. Louis, would become infamous.
Well, this guy was like videotaping right in the front row. Okay, Axl, you know, said something to the security guy. The security guy wasn't going to do anything about it, so he finally said, "Hey, you know what?" And he jumped in.
And the next thing I know, I see Axl flying off the stage, and I see all these black feathers flying up. He got on stage, he said, "F*** the security," and he threw the mic down, and then he ran off. I went into Axl's dressing room, and I kind of said to him, "Hey, man, what's up?" And he said, "I lost my contact."
You hear the cheer go from the, all of a sudden it gets really dark to this kind of growl. Not cool to hear when you're off stage and you were just the band up on stage.
The band did try to go back out on stage and play the show, but the fans didn't actually let them. I don't know if the fans knew that. They just started going crazy. I mean, they were taking chairs from the back of the audience, you know, back of the venue, and bringing them up, handing them over to each other to throw up on stage. It was super destructive. I mean, I think all the PA system got destroyed, a lot of the sound equipment, lights, mics, everything.
The incident resulted in 60 injuries, 16 arrests, $200,000 in damages to the brand new amphitheater, and the loss of much of Guns N' Roses' staging equipment. Axl was charged with having incited the riot, but police were unable to arrest him until almost a year later. Axl got 2 years probation and had to pay a $50,000 fine. Guns N' Roses' knack for attracting trouble did nothing to damage their image across the Atlantic, as they sold out shows all over Europe. But the toll of being in a group as popular as GNR proved to be too much for its quietest member. After years of booze and drugs taking their toll, rhythm guitarist Izzy Stradlin cleaned up his act and became sober.
Izzy started looking like he was drifting a little bit.
He didn't want to deal with it all. He had enough. He had enough with the waiting 3 hours for Axl to go on stage, and the band is ready, everybody's drunk, so, and Izzy wasn't drinking, so coffee and tea is not going to keep you happy for long. And the fun part of it was getting lost.
I don't think that Izzy ever got the credit for what he put in songwriting-wise. So, you know, you take away that little piece of the magic, and then, you know, they fired Steven, and, you know, there's another piece that goes away. To me, the magic was those 5 guys.
Guitarist Gilby Clarke replaced Izzy Stradlin, and the tour rolled on, gathering even more momentum when GNR joined up with friends Metallica on July 17, 1992, to do a mini North American tour.
I mean, it came together so effortless because it was just something that we both wanted and something that was greater than either of us separately, and it had never really been done. You know, you get the 2 biggest bands at the time in North America, each playing full headline sets, and we each had our own staging, we each had our own hoopla and Yahoo and all that stuff, and that was obviously something that was unprecedented.
On August 8, 1992, both bands were scheduled to put on a show at Montreal's Olympic Stadium. During Metallica's set, frontman James Hetfield was badly burned after being too close to a pyrotechnics blast.
You know, so we had to cut our set short.
And this would have been where Guns N' Roses could have like saved the day and done like a major, hour set or whatever.
But something was going on with the system, with the PA system, and Axl couldn't hear himself, and he's screaming and he's hurting himself. He's going to leave.
Axl sort of cut their set short, and then because of a short set from Metallica and a short set from Guns, there were 60,000 paying customers in Montreal who were not particularly happy about that.
Rioters overturned cars, smashed windows, looted local stores, and set fires. Local authorities were barely able to bring the mob under control. To this day, Axl is still criticized for not stepping up and saving the day. But despite the mayhem in Quebec, the tour was a big financial success.
The Use Your Illusion tour got very, very bloated. Axl had taken on psychotherapists on tour with him. He had spiritual advisors. They had masseurs, hairdressers, stylists.
To me, it got a little ridiculous. And then there was even more people added to the stage.
It got so big, the machine was so big, and I felt pushed along by this, 25 Mack trucks that wouldn't stop. And there was no way out. We couldn't go and play theaters, and we couldn't. The band was too big.
The high point for me on Use Your Illusion tour, ending it. It was so long.
The tour set attendance records and was one of the longest concert tours in rock history. Over 28 months, the band played almost 200 shows. On a roll, Guns N' Roses returned to the studio to record a new album, but it was clear that something was wrong.
These are people that are at wit's end, trying desperately to make music together.
There was no guidebook on what was going to happen to your band when you blow up, when you get as big as we did.
After gaining worldwide success with fans and critics alike, the hard rock group Guns N' Roses began considering what musical direction they would explore next. But the band had already started eroding with the loss of 2 members of the classic lineup. On November 23, 1993, the group released their follow-up to the financially successful Use Your Illusions records.
Spaghetti Incidents was a record that they put together, and the packaging had all of the band's favorite punk rock covers.
The group had managed to get the new recording out, but anxiety levels had risen among the members.
The tension between the people making this album was palpable to someone listening to the album. These are people that are at wit's end, trying desperately to make music together.
Things aren't working out and you have no friends left, really. You just have drug dealers and alcohol. It was just stress all along, so all they did was drugs.
There was no guidebook on what was going to happen to your band when you blow up, when you get as big as we did. And I self-medicated myself really good.
Axl made them sign over the name to him, and that was like the beginning of the end. The band was just like, this is no longer our band, it's the Axl Rose Show, so.
Slash quit the band for good in October of 1996. Gilby Clarke, the replacement for rhythm guitarist Izzy Stradlin, had already been fired by Axl because he felt Gilby's songwriting skills weren't up to snuff. Drummer Matt Sorum was fired from the group following an argument with Axl in mid-1997. Duff McKagan, the bass player and last original GNR member other than Axl, became sober after his pancreas exploded from acute pancreatitis. That, combined with his wife becoming pregnant, made Duff decide it was time for a life change.
My time had come. That was a simple choice for me. It wasn't really musical or anything,
No band has ever failed so badly at being great because they were the biggest band in the world. They were the world's most dangerous band. And what did they do with it?
If they hadn't imploded, they would be like the Stones. I think they would have been one of those bands that would have just kept going.
I don't think the rock scene has ever been the same since Guns N' Roses because no one's been able to capture the magic that those 5 people had.
I always thought of the band as a fist. They didn't necessarily love each other that much necessarily, but it took all of them together to make that music.
They changed the whole face of rock and roll music.
They had the right look. They made great videos. They had the great songs. They had the whole thing was working right, and they were a great band. That's as simple as that.
It's all ultimately about songs. Great songs are almost bigger than the time frame. They're bigger than the people that play them. We can all wish we had 5 of the great songs of all time.
History always repeats itself, and the former members of Guns N' Roses once again found themselves circling each other on the music scene, playing with each other sporadically on side projects and special occasions. In 2002, Slash, Duff, and Matt Sorum started a new band called Velvet Revolver.
They just wanted it. They just wanted to go so bad that it was a done deal before it was a done deal, basically.
After an exhaustive search for a lead singer, they decided on vocalist Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, a frontman with his own on-stage charisma, but also with the baggage of a heroin addiction. He was able to get clean with the help of Duff and the same program that he got sober on. With that hurdle overcome, Slash, Duff, and Matt were back where they wanted to be.
We have really the illustrious catalogs of not only Guns, but Stone Temple Pilots to choose from, and it's pretty awesome. The crowd reacts, yeah, they go crazy.
After Guns N' Roses, I didn't know what I was going to do. There was a period there was a little weird for all of us. If you ask Slash that question or Duff, they would probably tell you the same thing. And then to come back and be playing with each other again, you know, is a real gift.
Velvet Revolver's debut album went to #1, is double platinum, and the band won a Grammy Award for the single Slither. The band Guns N' Roses, still fronted by Axl Rose, continues to live on. Axl has been working on material for the next album, Chinese Democracy, since 1994.
I've been hearing that Chinese Democracy will come out since I was in diapers, practically.
I wait with bated breath, just like everybody else does, and listen, I can relate to, I mean, the record's gonna come out when Axl wants it to come out.
If Axl never puts out Chinese Democracy, we'll never know whether it's brilliant or not. And I think that's what keeps him from doing it, especially on the heels of the success of Velvet Revolver. He sees his past bandmates having success.
I heard a rough demo, and I have to say it was so good to hear his voice, and it sounded killer.
So the big question is, would the classic members of GNR ever get past their differences and reunite?
The kids are just waiting for the 5 of them to get back together again and do a recording. You know, personally, I don't think it'll ever happen, but who knows? Maybe if they, like, go broke, they'll, like, consider it.
Or just leave it alone. You know, it was cool. Maybe if you reunite, it's going to destroy the whole thing.
I mean, I'm leaving that decision up to Axl. You know, it ultimately is his decision.
Today, Steven Adler is once again laying down a heavy backbeat on drums and garnering rave reviews in his own band, Adler's Appetite.
Guns N' Roses today is a great rock band, putting on great rock shows. A lot of people don't like the fact that only one original member, W. Axl Rose, is in this band, and that the other guys are master musicians or journeyman musicians. There are no other stars on stage.
Very recently, Guns N' Roses was slated to headline a huge concert that this station, K-Rock in Los Angeles, puts on every year. So about 15-20 minutes after the last band plays, Guns N' Roses, the band, shows up. Axl's nowhere to be found. K-Rock management's furiously on the phone with Axl Rose management. He's in the air right now. Is there any chance he can get a police escort? And it wasn't even as if there was any question about it. There's superstars and then there's Axl Rose. 30, 40 minutes later, after the crowd is sure that they're not going to see Guns N' Roses, Axl Rose burns into the backstage area and he walks out. He lights up a cigarette, he smokes it, he starts talking to himself. He throws it down and goes out and commences to destroy the crowd. It was right on the verge. I mean, the stitches were about to break. But somehow, instead of it falling over into complete chaos, that night it leaned back over into utter perfection. And if it didn't every once in a while fall over into that destructive area where things go totally wrong, I don't think we'd be sitting here talking about them today.